Something that I quickly wanted to discuss was how living in different parts of Sydney shape the way that you view your ethnicity or your background. Sydney is a very multicultural city, but it is quite segregated. So there will be certain areas where you know that majority of the population of people will be a certain ethnicity. If you live in Sydney, you know, if you know, you know, and you usually don't stray far from those areas that you're segregated in. Because I grew up as Vietnamese Chinese in Sydney, in a predominantly Asian part of Sydney, the way that I viewed my culture and my ethnicity was always full of love and respect, and I was very proud of my culture because I had a lot of people around me that were the same. We were all second generation immigrants. There's also a bit of camaraderie as well with second generation child of immigrants that grew up in Sydney with parents that were born in a different country. There is that relatability of being a child of immigrants and not necessarily having to be from the same country. But I have heard from friends that grew up in areas that aren't predominantly that ethnicity. So, you know, Asians who grew up in a predominantly white area of the city or even the country, they feel a lot more different and more ostracized. And I think it's so interesting to see that perspective and how this sense of lack of belonging contributes to social isolation and also then contributes to the feeling of shame or feeling kind of resentment towards your culture or your ethnicity because you don't belong. I love hearkening things back to our hunter-gatherer days because we were hunter-gatherers and we lived in very communal settings for thousands of years before we even started agriculture, before we lived in these modern cities of today. And when we did live in these tribal hunter-gatherer communities, there was always a sense of belonging, and I think it's so innate in our biology that we need that sense of belonging because that's how we survived. If you were kicked out of the group because you were antisocial, you would die. So you needed to foster that sense of community and those relationships with people to survive. And that's why when you feel that isolation, if you feel different as a different ethnicity compared to the majority, that can have a real impact on mental health and how you view yourself and your self-esteem. I think that also ties into how important representation is in media because it's great when you see, for example, Asians in Western media because we are a big proportion of many immigrant Western countries now and other ethnicities as well. I can only speak from an Asian background because I'm Asian, but of course representation is really important for that reason so that people feel belonging on a larger scale rather than just being in a tribal community. But that's also my issue as well with cities and why I feel like cities are not really good for mental health. This is a bit of a side tangent, but I feel like cities just kind of create that disconnect with that sense of community that we need to feel to belong because everyone's out for themselves because you're not likely to see that person again if it's a stranger. And if you are in a smaller community, you know, you're more willing to be nice and you're more likely to be nice and friendly to others because you probably see them the next week.